Imagine you finally throw out the price for something you're trying to sell, and your customer thinks about it for a second and says, okay, great. When do we start? This is what happens when you talk to the right customer rather than worrying so much about the right price or your sales process or, really all the work we put into to try to sell better. Now, good sales is something to try to learn. It's something to try to master. But when we talk about doing sales well, it's just as much a pricing conversation as it is anything else. Hey, welcome to the Good Advice Podcast. My name's Blake Benz. I'm the host of the Good Advice Podcast. Been doing this podcast for a while now, and I know a thing or two about the actionable, practical things you need to know to actually grow and scale your business. Now, we got a lot to talk about on today's show today. We have many things to dive into, a couple stories to share with you, and some conversations that we've been having, whether that's at our local Tuesday morning growth group meetup, conversations with customers and what have you. We're going to dive into all of it today so that you have a better idea of how the heck do you price your stuff, and more importantly, how do you price your stuff in a way that you feel is fair and actually is the actual value of what you think you're worth. We'll be diving into that today, but before we actually get into it, here's a word from one of the amazing businesses that sponsors the podcast. Of course, if you've ever thought about advertising on the show, you can just reach out, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. And if you enjoy the podcast, you can support our Patreon at patreon.com/goodadvice. All that to say, thank you for those of you who support the show. We'll be right back soon. See you soon. Life is constantly moving quickly, and in fact, I find myself more and more wanting a pause button to capture some of those special memories with my family. That's why I love what the team at Duncan & Stone is doing. They've created high-quality keepsake journals for every stage of life. From people who are freshly engaged all the way to welcoming their first child, Duncan & Stone has a series of journals that are incredible for capturing some of those precious memories, and not just memories, with the stories and conversations that you want to have with your loved ones one day. Personally, I love the Dear Daughter Journal because it captures all of the amazing memories that I want to be able to tell my daughter Maylee one day. The team at Duncan & Stone understands the value of keeping these memories close to home. That's why they've spared no expense in creating high-quality journals that are designed in-house because they know how precious these memories are. Check out duncanandstone.com and see some of the journals that will walk you through every stage of life. They're easy to use and beautiful to display, and most importantly, they capture what matters. Again, go to duncanandstone.com to find out more. So this topic came up in our Tuesday morning growth group, which, by the way, if you're a local business owner, you got to check out the growth group. It's on Tuesday mornings. We got about 15 to 20 business owners who show up to that on a weekly basis. It's Tuesdays at 9 o'clock at Red Kite in Springdale. And it's a great opportunity to get together and have some coffee talk on the things that work in business, the things that don't work in business, some good things that are happening for you that you want to have a chance to share about, as well as ask questions on really what your next big move is. Now, a great thing about that event is that it's not a sales-oriented group. You can come to it and freely ask your questions and not feel like you're being sold to. I personally have never sold anything at this event, and I plan on keeping it that way. And it's one of those things that, it helps keep the group authentic and valuable for those who enjoy coming back on a week-to-week basis. So this came up in our group on Tuesday morning. Someone was asking the question basically around price. And what do you do about customers who balk at your price, who say, oh, that's too expensive. Oh, that's too much. I once had a boss who told me that. He said, Blake, pricing is an art and a science. And that would get quipped out every now and then. And I don't have necessarily any issue with that saying. There's nothing wrong with it. I think really what he was saying was there is some discipline around pricing well, but on the flip side, there's also quite a bit of nuance. And I've even seen people do pricing as rigid as like a pricing sheet where, you're going to do you're delivering this much quantity of a certain thing, and here's like our expenses, here's cost of goods, yada, yada, all these things that go into a spreadsheet. This is going to be the cost if you order this many units. All that stuff is fine. This is not a podcast saying that you shouldn't be diligent, that you shouldn't be thoughtful. Really, though, today's episode is all about charging really what you're worth, and more importantly, getting away from being the lowest option on the table. Now, there's quite a bit to unpack here in today's conversation. Many of us know that we don't want to be the lowest on the table. We know that being the lowest on the table is often the most challenging for running a business. It means long hours. It means just an exhausted, being exhausted, and understanding that, when you work your tail off for a few bucks, it's very hard. It actually makes you wonder why you got into business in the first place. Many of us got into business because we were done with the corporate world. We were done with, having our destinies controlled by someone else. And we were energized around the idea of, I don't know how much money I'm going to make, but at least it all falls on me and not someone else who, they're going to give me a 1% to 3% raise every year. No, this isn't everybody. This is over exaggerating sort of the hero's journey of I quit this job. It's very much the what's the movie with Tom Cruise? Show Me the Money. What's that movie called? Jerry Maguire. When Jerry Maguire has like this kind of victorious quitting moment where he walks out and he's like the hero in the shot, and then he realizes that no one's going to come with him. That is actually, by the way, entrepreneurship. You start your business, you're really energized around it, you're really excited about it, and then you find out very quickly that no one actually really cares that much. In fact, those closest to you are often the ones being most negative about it, who are like, ooh, what are you doing? Are you sure about this? Are you positive? And it just is what it is. It's how it goes, right? But hey, at least you're in control. And I don't say that sarcastically. I just say that despite the challenging circumstances, many of us like the idea of being in the driver's seat rather than someone else to write our story going forward. Many of us, when we get into business, though, we envision how high can this thing go? What could this do for myself financially? What doors could this open? And whenever I sit down with a new business owner, the question I typically ask is, okay, what's your plan for this business? Is this something that you're planning to be a side hustle where it makes you some money on the side? Are you trying to you're paying your monthly rent or your mortgage? Like, is that the intention behind this business? Or is this designed to one day substitute your current salary? Or even beyond that, are you planning to take this thing to $1 million plus? And I have all those conversations, by the way. All of those are represented. I have a customer right now, new business owner. I said, hey, where do you want to take this thing? And he said, I'm really just looking to bring in some extra money. This is around the amount of dollars I'm looking at per year. I think it was like maybe 10 grand or something like that, or maybe 5 grand. I can't remember. But for them, very much this is a nest egg. Had another customer who was doing, I think, like around 200, 300K a year. And they were like, hey, I absolutely want to take this thing to $1 million. And then I have a current customer right now who he makes around 200K. And he's like, Blake, honestly, man, I'm really happy with the business. I'm not really looking to take it anywhere. I'm just really happy with where it is today. The conversations are different for all of those people, but one thing is in common across those things. I give the same advice to all three of them. And it's usually, honestly, to raise your prices. Now, in a vacuum, this is actually pretty bad advice because many people do not understand pricing. They don't understand buying behavior, and they don't understand getting in front of the right person when you talk about your price. And so many businesses, or actually I've seen this online even, this whole quotable around charge your worth, don't devalue yourself, which by the way is all great advice, but we don't always understand exactly what that means. Now, before we actually get into the conversation of pricing well, having someone pay you $5,000 for your services, $2,500 for your services, whatever that number is, if you just think about your service in your industry, being not the middle, not the lowest, but actually towards the high end and feeling really good about that. Before you get into any of that, you first have to look in the mirror and think about what is your perspective on money. I say this because for me, I had a very interesting situation. I was working in Houston. I was a high school teacher. I remember we were raising money. I think I even paid myself for some of my students to get like basketball shoes and like some supplies. I remember there was one time that I was leading this. It was a debate team basically, and we had to go to a competition, and we couldn't get the like transit, like a bus to take them. And so we had to use like Enterprise or Hertz or something. And I think even at one point I had to pay out of pocket like to get that because there just wasn't a means to do it. This is very common, by the way. There was a report that came out earlier this year on the amount of money that teachers spend on their classroom. It is in definitely more than the hundreds. It was in the thousands of like their own classroom supplies, like different. And I remember this too, by the way. I remember, when you go into a classroom, like all those posters you see on the wall, like those things are actually pretty expensive. I remember buying those things for my classroom because I didn't want to have like these bare walls and being shocked that I had spent like $500-$600 on it. Point being, though, I left teaching, I entered the business world, and one of my first contracts was a contract that was worth, I think, around $160,000. It's a six-figure contract. This blew my mind. There was a $160,000 contract that I was part of that I just couldn't even fathom that amount of money. I think at the time, the most money I had was maybe $3,000. This was maybe 10 years ago, I guess, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. But the most money I'd ever had was around $3,000. So seeing an invoice for that amount of money blew my mind. I remember selling a customer, this was a consultancy. I remember I was selling a customer, I think it was like a $10,000 gig. And I was trying to sell this customer, and the customer, this was a leadership consulting company. And I was trying to sell this customer on having one of their employees, like one of their managers, come to this conference thing we were doing. It was around $10,000. And they were like, okay. And I'm like, and I knew nothing about sales, by the way. Like, I think I am average at sales today. I was horrific at sales a decade ago. Anywho, so I'm selling this guy as best as I can. He comes back and he says, okay, I think we want to buy. And I'm like, whew, okay, cool. I was excited about this. Now, we didn't make any kind of commission, but I was excited for the organization. Like, sweet, we're making a deal. He comes back and he says, I think I want to do the $10,000. I want to send this employee to this thing. But hey, actually, I think what I want to do is I want to send all my other department heads, for lack of a better phrase, people in charge of each different department within our plant. I think I want to send all of them. And I think it was like 6 people or 8 people or something. So they were like, well, how does that sound? And I was like, okay. And they were like, how much would that be? And I was like, 10 times 8? Or maybe it was 6 people. It ended up being like a $65,000 contract. And I was like, yeah, $65K. And they were like, okay. I had no resistance. I had no sales resistance. And the deal was done. And they paid, I think they paid either all or half up front. It blew my mind. Guys, you have to understand, this blew my mind. I could not understand someone spending that kind of money. So, here's the first thing to understand. When it comes to selling at an honest rate, when it comes to selling a little bit higher than what's the average, when you think about putting yourself in that upper band of people offering your service, which is exciting, right? Because you can work with less customers, get paid more, and overall you can make more money. So many people are excited about that band of where you work and breathe in your business. The first thing you have to understand is that how you price your services is directly tied to your own perspective of money and worth. I came from a teaching background where every dollar mattered, I had a master's in education and I wasn't making very much money, where I just remember how hard it was to get classroom supplies, we really grinded for that extra dollar. I remember when I got my master's in education, how much I had to work to get a salary increase. So I came from that world into the business consulting world. My perspective, if I had gone it alone, if I didn't have those data points of the customer spending over $100K and the customer who spent $60K, I had another customer I sold who bought a program for $30K, I had another customer who bought a program for around $17K. So people were spending a lot of money. If I didn't have those data points, I would have come in trying to sell these same programs for under 10K, under 5K probably. Because for me, as someone who was a broke teacher, not making much money, my perspective of money was that 5K was a lot of money. So understand, first of all, if you're going to be a business owner who prices your stuff in a way where people see value in it and you're making good money from it, first things first, you have to understand your bias coming into the conversation. If you didn't come from money, you're typically going to be fear-driven. You're typically going to assume that someone isn't going to want to pay for it. You're going to assume that people will be scared of buying from you. You'll probably you'll overcompensate with that conversation and do your best to try to ensure that they don't feel like they're being taken advantage of when they were never thinking about that from the get-go. And ultimately, you lower the value because of your biases in wealth, because of your past experiences. So I think that's just the absolute first part of the conversation, is understanding how do you typically approach money, how do you typically approach your own finances, and all of the good, bad, and trauma associated with that then shapes your perspective of money. So let's move on from this conversation. Let's say that you see the value of your product, you want to charge a great rate for your product, but you're not sure what that conversation looks like. I think there's one really important factor in business when it comes to charging a valuable fee for what you do. First things first is understanding the simple, I keep saying first things first, by the way. I think I've said it like 12 times and I'm like, okay, we're on to like the 8th first things first. This is also just the joy, by the way, of this stuff all comes from the cuff. I don't have notes up. I don't have ChatGPT up. We're just talking here, right? So second, if you're going to charge a great rate, you have to understand that not everyone will be your customer. Had somebody in our group on Tuesday who brought up someone who was balking at their price, who said, I can't believe you're charging that much. I can't believe yada, yada. And they talked about what their response was. They give a great response to that person. And my add-on to this conversation was, hey, you also need to know that there will never be a shortage of people who balk at your price. There just won't ever be one. There will never be a shortage of people who say you're too expensive. How can you pay that? How can you charge that much? I know someone who can do it cheaper. which that one most people don't say these days anymore because they know how much of a negative stereotype it is. But they will mention your competitor. They'll say, well, hey, your competitor's charging. And here's what's really funny is I think sometimes people have to understand that sometimes someone is approaching you from a bargain standpoint. They're talking to you from a bargain buying standpoint. And it is to your advantage to avoid getting in that conversation and standing your ground. If someone comes to me looking for a bargain or looking for a deal, I never entertain those conversations. But many people are, frankly, and I don't mean this in a heartless way or a mean way, many people are broke. We know, I mean, you've seen probably stats on the average amount of dollars that someone has in their savings account. It's not very much, typically zero. So many people are broke. Many people don't have they haven't navigated the biases that I've mentioned earlier on their own finances. So if you're going to charge a healthy fee, healthy for your business, healthy for your time, healthy for your investment, it means understanding that you can't be the bargaining person in these conversations. You can't be in this conversation at all. I had a customer once who she ran a cleaning company. And I think the average price that she charged was maybe like $200. I think, I can't remember, $150, $200 to clean someone's house. Well, around that time on my Instagram, I got an ad for, it was a really actually pretty well-made video, but it was an ad for, and it's funny how, by the way, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, they are so creepily smart at this stuff. Now, they're not fully smart, but they're creepily smart in the sense of they always know which customer I'm spending my most time with because my ads always cycle around that industry. So one of my best customers right now is an AV company out of Melbourne, Australia. I was getting ads for AV companies for like 3 weeks straight, where I was like, now I wasn't even engaging with their social media. So I don't know how it happened, but Facebook in the sky, they knew, right? Well, around the same time, I was working with this cleaning company, and I got an ad for a cleaning company, for cleaning services. So this ad was people cleaning the house, whatever, and real light and fluffy ad, like, oh, wouldn't you love this, yada yada, and the price was like $5 to get started. They were like as little as $5 for your first time. Now, no business owner anywhere is surviving on $5 a month. Now, how they often get you is $5 for the first visit. We look around the space, do a little cleanup for you, and then we sign you to an annual whatever that's, $35 a month, whatever it is, who knows. But point being, it would be nonsensical for the $200 a cleaning business owner to ask, how do I compete with the $35 a month business owner? Like, this is where you get into the conversation of bargaining. It immediately lowers your value to try and convince someone why you're better than the $35 a month person. And we're going to dig into that more here in a second. But point being, there will always be competitors who charge less than you. Advertising on the podcast at its cheapest for the Good Advice podcast is around $95 an episode. I know someone who charges, I think, $10 an episode on their ad. It's not good or bad. They're just different. I've nothing negative to say about that competitor. They just have a different price point. But I'm never going to get into a conversation with someone on, well, you're $95 an episode. This person's $10 an episode. Tell me, how are you 9 times better? So it's always to your advantage to avoid these conversations entirely, because typically the person who wants to pay $10 an hour, or excuse me, $10 an episode, typically that is someone who is not a great long-term customer for you anyway. Because, and it's not about, in some cases, that buyer is broke. So literally speaking, they're not a great long-term customer for you. But changing the conversation, that could be a great business, But if they're only willing to spend $10 a month, or excuse me, $10 an episode on you, that means that they don't truly value what it is you're selling. This is how we operate as people every day. We spend our money on the things we truly value. There's no like witty thing to say about that. That's just literally how we operate. Our money goes where we value it. So if someone comes to me and they say, Blake, I love your podcast. I love podcasting in general. I want to do some advertising. I'm very transparent from the get-go. And I say, yeah, this is about what it's going to cost. And some people, because I'm very transparent from the get-go, some people go, wow, okay, that's more than I thought it was. And other people go, and these are frankly my favorite customers. Other people go, wow, okay, great. Love it. Where do I sign up? I had a guy who just recently bought a block of episodes. He said, hey, how much is it going to take to get this many episodes? And I want to air it every couple of weeks. I said, hey, this is how much it is. And he said, okay, sounds great. That's all it was, right? That's all it was. It was easy. It was an easy sale. But sometimes people, they put it on you to be the big picture answer for your business. And you have to understand that for your business, you're selling a very specific thing, a very specific answer for a very specific problem. And it's unfair and frankly, a situation you should run away from if their dollars in you is supposed to save their business. I was in a conversation with the guy. We were doing some work together. Our work together had brought quite a few people to him. And he was frustrated that they weren't converting. And I said, hey, you're your business's salesperson. It's on you to sell. You got to sell them. I'm not going to sell them. I'm not even having a conversation with them. You have to sell them. My job is I got them to you. Now you need to sell, But people will often come to me and they're like, hey, I need some business help. I need some business consulting, yada, yada. Here's all the things that are on fire in my business and go, fix that for me. And I try to be pretty transparent from the get-go. Hey, we're going to focus on a very specific thing. We're going to focus on a very intentional thing. And I'm going to be really good with that one thing, but everything else is going to fall on you. So understanding that not everyone can be your customer then means that whenever you are selling someone, you have to be gauging what are they expecting from you? And secondly, what are they going to be owning on their end? And then lastly, it's important for them to understand if they truly value the work that you're going to do for them, then they're going to be willing to pay for it. Now, not everyone will always have the means to pay for it. I had someone approach me and they said, hey, I want to buy advertising on the show. I said, this is what it costs. They said, oh, I really want to. I just can't right now. That's fine. It doesn't bother me. Or I had a guy who I was talking to the other day, because, now with Podcastable, I'm managing podcasts. We're producing podcasts. We're launching shows. We're editing shows. We're creating content from shows. All that's coming through Podcastable. Well, I was talking to someone the other day and he was like, oh man, I would switch to you in a heartbeat. I just can't afford you. And in those cases, it's not an insult. It's not anything to take personal. You as a business owner shouldn't come back and, oh, okay, hang on. I'll bring my prices down for you. You have someone who did you one of the kindest gestures they can do you. They were open and honest with you from the get-go on we're not a right fit. We're not the right fit together. So you have to understand who is your customer, who's not your customer. And when you're selling someone, you want to also force them to sell you on why you are the right fit for them. Now, force them to sell you probably sounds like a bit car salesy or like punishing. You're not actually like forcing it, but you are asking a lot of good questions. So like for me, someone might call. I'll use an example that I've mentioned a few times on the podcast. I had a woman who called. She said, hey, I need help for my business. I sell journals for women. I'm looking to hire a consultant. I said, okay, how many have you sold? She said, I've sold 12. And I was like, okay, like 12 today? And she goes, I've sold 12 total. And I was like this year or? And she's like, total. I've sold 12 journals total. And I said, okay, how long have you been in business? I've been in business for 3 years. Okay. So is this like your full-time job? Or no, it's my full-time job. I work over here and this is just like a thing I do in my spare time. Okay. Are you planning on going full-time into it? No, I don't know. I'm not really sure. Okay. This doesn't feel like a big problem for you in the sense of, you're looking to get a little bump in your business, but the solution I sell isn't a little bump in your business. It's not we're misaligned on my intentionality for your business and your expectations for your own business. Someone who comes to me and says, hey, Blake, I'm selling $100,000 in journals or what have you, and I want to triple this thing. This is a big problem that I want to solve. It opens the door for X, Y, and Z that I want to deal with down the road. That's someone with a very big problem and who cares a lot about that problem. So it's to my benefit to look for those people who are going to care about my answer, who are going to see the value in my answer, than it is to find someone who's more nonchalant or isn't really in a position in their business to truly see the value of what I'm offering. I think sometimes in sales, by the way, we are really hard on ourselves from a sales conversation. I'm like, why am I not a better salesperson? Why can't I sell better? Yada, yada. And the problem isn't that you're a bad salesperson. It's that you're talking to the wrong person. Like you're talking to someone who was never going to be your customer, or it's not at all the right time. Many of us want to do sales honestly. So be honest with yourself and not beating yourself up about, wow, I'm such a terrible salesperson. It's no, you're not talking to the right people at the right time of the pain point and offering the solution when they actually want it, need it, or could fully realize it. Here's a great example. One of a great local business person I know is Steve Lay. You probably heard his ad on the podcast. Steve is a bookkeeper. He's an amazing bookkeeper, does a lot of great stuff with his business. Well, if Steve was having a conversation with someone on selling his services to a business owner, and that person said, you know what, I just don't trust anyone with my books. I don't trust anyone with my books. I'm never going to trust anyone with my books. I prefer to do it all myself. I had a bookkeeper who ruined my taxes for me or what have you. And I'm only, I will just never, ever, ever allow someone else to touch my books. I'm never hiring someone. How nonsensical would it be for one, Steve to take that personal, and two, to, double his efforts and be like, okay, I'm going to sell this person. Or worse, for Steve to walk away and be like, oh no, I'm such a bad salesperson. The person didn't buy from me. They never were going to buy from you. They communicated that they weren't going to buy from you. See, we have this really weird Wolf on Wall Street approach to sales, which is that there's this conversation that has to happen. There's these certain things that have to be said. Oh, they said no, I need to flip that. They gave me their objection. How do I handle the objection? And again, without people getting mad at me, I get it. There's a process to all this. There's a nuance to all this. There's a way you can handle it. There's a way you can redirect it. And you know what? I think the genius salespeople out there have probably nailed that down pat. What's worked for me is when someone tells me I don't want what you have, it is to my benefit, instead of chasing that person, to redirect that energy to someone who already wants what I have. It'd be like if you were selling high-speed internet to someone and you talk to 50 people on the street. You're on a street corner, people are walking by, and you're saying hey, do you want high-speed internet? And every person who walks by, they're like, no, I don't care about high-speed internet. Well, the person who walks by and says, oh my gosh, I've been thinking about getting high-speed internet. Well, it's infinitely better to you're not going to spend an hour with the person who just said, I don't want high-speed internet. I don't even use internet. I live in the boonies. I live on a farm. We have no power. We churn our own butter. I don't believe in electricity at all. Why would you spend an hour? And this is what we do is someone tells us no, and some sales guru somewhere has convinced us, okay, they said no. Now, how do we redirect them? Now, how do we yada, yada? No, here's how you handle the objection. Instead of being like, hey, thanks for being transparent with me. I'm going to respect you in your time. You're going to respect my time. If you ever change your mind, I'm here. Take it easy. Bye-bye. Now, if you're a little clever, you'll find a way to stay engaged with them in case they ever do want to come back and work for you or work with you. But redirecting your energy then to the person who says, oh my gosh, I really want high-speed internet. Oh, I've been waiting to talk to have you ever been on a sales call where you get on a sales call and the person says, wow, this is crazy. I was just talking. Like I was getting coffee with someone on Tuesday morning and there wasn't any kind of like pre-sale that happened at all. Like it was just like a serendipitous get together where I had talked to this guy on LinkedIn. We realized we lived in the same town. It was like, hey, let's get together. Let's have a cup of coffee. So we did. We sit down and he's like, hey, what do you do? And I'm asking him what he does. And I'm like, yeah, I run this business, Podcastable. We launch and produce podcasts. We create content from those podcasts that people love. Yeah, I'm giving like the 10-second elevator speech, whatever it is, the elevator pitch, excuse me. Well, he goes, wow, this is really weird because I have a podcast. I had a podcast actually. I haven't been working on it. Tell me more about. I want to hear more about this Podcastable. Like those are the really incredible moments in sales where it's the right time, the right place. It's way more, it's to your benefit to not waste time in these other conversations. But more importantly, I don't think many of us need to be convinced to not waste our time. I think that many of us need to be encouraged to not be so hard on ourselves when those people tell you no. Now in business, you're going to be told no a million times, way more than you're ever going to be told yes. We hear that. We don't always believe that, but you will. You're going to be told no more than you get told yes. And because of that, there is so much emotional stock put into our own businesses of we want it to be successful. And going back to those things I said at the start of the show, you're trying to maybe break the cycle of money in your family. You're trying to develop, control of your own destiny. There's all these things that are very important to us and emotionally very strong in us. So even though logically we know why that person said no, it can still hurt. It can still be something where it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they told me no. But it's to your advantage to get over those things quickly and instead find the people who are eager to say yes to you. I think about over the last year, some of my most lucrative customers, lucrative being, we'll just say $5,000 plus in terms of what they spent. My most lucrative customers, like I'm thinking about them right now, the easiest sales I've ever had. Out of all the sales I made last year, I'll just say my top 3 best sales, they were all a breeze. I didn't even feel like I was selling because it was the right time. They knew what they wanted. We were on the same page in terms of, what the end result was. We both saw the value in it. Now, understand that a lot of this is contingent on you actually doing good work. I had good work, and one of them was a podcast. Actually, 2 of them were podcast people. I had good work to show them. I said, hey, here's some of our other work. Take a look. Tell me what you think. And it all played out very easily because we were aligned from the get-go. So don't beat yourself up about all the people who tell you no, because you're simply redirecting your energy to the right person. And keep in mind that it's a waste of your time to convince someone to be your buyer when they simply do not want to. It's an obvious statement. And yet again, we put so much emotional stock into it that it becomes very difficult to walk away from those conversations. Think about this for a second. There are people out there right now who know they need to hire you. They know they need what you have. And so the conversation then shifts from not being it's not about being a better salesperson. It's not about pricing it better. It's about figuring out, how do I talk to those people? There's a lot of great events in your area. There's a lot of great events in the NWA area. But I was talking to a guy who's having a really hard time selling his business, selling his service. And I said, here's your problem. All the events you're going to, not a single one of them has your customer there. You got to go at it a different way. You got to find a different way to talk to your customer, because what you're doing now, it's not working. Now, I will give you a couple of tangible things around pricing that you can try. I'll just give you some quick 1, 2, 3s. Number one, don't let your bias on what you would pay affect what you think other people would pay. There are things that I would never spend my money on that other people will spend their money on. Just because you would never spend $500 a month on advertising does not mean that there aren't handfuls of businesses out there who spend infinitely more than that. I mean, not literally infinitely. I was talking to a guy this morning who spending $3,000 a month on advertising. $500 doesn't seem like too much, huh? But often we let our perspective on what I would spend my money on dictate what other people will spend their money on. And you can't make that mistake. Second thing I'll say, if you are just starting out, start with your price low, and every time you make a sale, increase the price. And essentially what you're doing is you are finding that sweet spot for what allows you to get paid a fair wage, while also the market telling you, hey, there are people who will pay you for this. I'll say that another way. My wife, she does online tutoring. I think she's like $55 an hour. She started at $10 an hour. And I remember calendar was booked up, literally 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., lesson after lesson. And I said, Joy, you got to raise your prices. I would raise my prices to $25 an hour. And I think actually the conversation shifted from there. I was like, you should charge $50 an hour or $45 an hour or something like that. And she's like, well, Blake, I can't. I'd lose half my customers. And I was like, yeah, that's the point. You go from $10 an hour to $50 an hour and you lose half your customers, you're up. Not only are you up, but you now have the other half of your day to get either more customers or do whatever you want. That's the simple math of it. It's the simple math of it. Now it's being comfortable with understanding that, again, not everyone can be your customer. Not everyone will be your customer. And there will always be someone who still asks for $10 an hour. But, point being, she started low, and every time she got a new customer, I was basically there being like, raise your prices. And when she finally did, she was like, oh my gosh, like, why didn't I do this sooner? So second piece of advice, you can start low and increase your prices from there. The third thing, and this is a newer one. This was something that I ran into probably 6 months ago. Maybe shorter than that. I can't remember. So I was talking to someone about working together, and they said, hey, what's your fee? And I said, it's $2,500. And he said, which I felt like was fairly cheap. I felt like it was fairly inexpensive. And it may even be, by the way, it may be that I put it so low, which I was trying to cut this guy a deal, which is, it's a whole nother conversation on deals, discounts, what have you. So I was trying to be earnest. I said, yeah, $2,500, which very common for me. That's a pretty common number that I throw out. So I throw out this number and he goes, wow, that's kind of expensive. Okay, that's my first data point. First data point that this person probably is not my customer. The reason for that is because of the number of other people that I've charged double that. Yeah, it's $5,000. Okay, great. Here's the money. Here's, give me your credit card. There you go. So I throw out this number. He goes, wow, that's kind of expensive. And I go, okay, well, tell me what you think. And he goes, well, like, what am I getting for that? Like, what all am I getting? And I think this is a situation we run into. And I had this situation where the conversation devolved into what kind of felt like a job interview. I should have done a better job of not letting it get to that point. And this is, by the way, I talk a lot about hey, it's not about being a bad salesperson. It's the right person, yada, yada. There are just times you just need to be a better salesperson. And in this case, I wasn't a good salesperson. He said, well, tell me all that you get for that. And I was like, yeah, you get this, you get that. And I could sense that this feels like a job interview. And I just knew from that moment on, I had lost the sale. Now, it was probably a good thing because the fact of the matter that he was pushing on it and questioning it signaled that the buy-in really wasn't there from the get-go and that it was already not what he was looking to spend. I get in these conversations often. It's, by the way, why I'm so open about being transparent in your pricing, because it weeds out people who were never going to pay what you would have wanted them to pay. But the insight, the number 3 tip for you is to never defend your price and to try to convince someone that the value is there. This is a hard one. It's been hard for me too, because I used the word earnest earlier. I'm earnest in helping people. I'm authentic and wanting to make sure that someone spends their dollar well. Part of that is my own bias, talking about bias. Part of that is my own bias of year 1 in business. When I first started Good Advice, spending around $15,000, not getting a single sale from it, and being deeply burned, put into a hole that was extremely difficult to climb out of. I shouldn't have been able to climb out of it. I think I only climbed out of it because I had friends who were generous enough to help in that season of my life. Anywho, having this conversation with this person, or just for you, if you find yourself in a conversation, and I was reminded of this, by the way. I was looking at this guy, Chris Dew, came up on my social media feed, and he said it really well. He said it better than I'll ever say it. He said, when someone questions you on price and they say, why does it cost that much? You know what your answer should be? It shouldn't be to go down the perk list. Oh, well, you get this, and then we do this, and like, hey, we're the only ones doing this, and like, hey, and this is, by the way, a really obnoxious thing that people throw out. Like, we give great customer service too, and yada, yada, and and you go down the perk list, and often we give a lot of perks to try to like over communicate value. Like, you get all this stuff, see the value? You can know you've lost that customer. When someone says, why does it cost that much? You respond with, it's what it costs. That was Chris Dew's advice. Great piece of advice. I think it's just spot on when it comes to really keeping your value what it is and not devaluing yourself trying to prove what you think your value is worth. So someone says, why does it cost that much? Because that's what it costs to get the result that you want. But why? What do you mean? That's the price. There's some nuance there, but try it and see. Yeah, that's if you want to get this result, that's what it costs. And not doing it apologetically, by the way. Yeah, I know it's really expensive. No. Now I will sometimes call it out. I'll say, hey, yeah, it's an investment. Yeah. And I think sometimes we're scared to say this because you can know when you say this, the onus of responsibility to deliver is entirely on you. And there are many people out there who are selling who have no intention on delivering the quality of what they promised. So if you're gonna stand your ground and offer those services, you should be prepared to make sure you actually deliver on it as well. So, anywho, I think that does it. I think that's it. This was a long conversation today. I had so many things that I wanted to talk about today, and I think we got to it all. So, all that to say, when it comes to pricing, make sure that you're not bringing your biases into the conversation. Don't think of it in terms of what you would spend, but in terms of what your customer would actually spend. And stick to your price. If you think it's worth that, stick to your price. Understand that it matters who you're selling to more than necessarily what you say when you're selling to that person. Hey, that's today's good advice. We we hit it top to bottom in terms of pricing. If you want to have a longer conversation on this, you have some thoughts you want to share with me, you can always reach out, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. If you love the podcast and you want to advertise on the podcast, you want to hear your business talked about in the intro to our show, you can also reach out at blake@goodadvicecoaching.com, and you can also always support the podcast on our Patreon. It's at patreon.com/goodadvice. I so appreciate all the supporters for the show. Thank you so much. That's today's good advice. I'll catch you later. See ya.